there will be a whole class of people he refers to as useless feeders. His idea for what we do with these people is give them video games and drugs and hope that they don't want something more.
No, that's the thing. When you ask ChatGPT something, it's most likely pulling from, the plethora of internet pages. But when it's pulling from somewhere that's not findable, just pulling this info from literally feels like the ether or another realm entirely. It's like, how does it know? And it answers so fast.
And so you just have this essentially moving towards full disembodiment from the human body, because that's how God made us, in a body, and Jesus came in a body. And so there is this corruption of the body happening. And when you pull a human out of the body into the spirit realm, that's when they can mess with you. That's when it's fair game.
What's up, Internet? Welcome to another episode of the Fringe Faith Podcast. My name is Thomas. I don't ever introduce myself, but that's fine. You all probably know who I am at this point. And today I am joined with my friends Theresa and Joe.
Hey. Hey.
They have two very different perspectives on today's topic, but we are going to talk about AI, the implications not only culturally, but also spiritually that we see and have researched and have sort of, I guess, discerned, you could say, about this whole AI thing. It's very interesting because culture is going in a certain direction. And it's funny, I used to love technology like a ton. And these days, like I mentioned in the episode with my wife, I love the tool oftentimes, but I'm so sick of I just don't like the direction technology's going in general. But yeah, we'll kind of get into it. And I think today we're going to start with some of the cultural things that are happening within the AI sphere and what it's going to do to society as a whole. Is there anything in particular on that note that you guys have noticed that kind of sticks out before we get into the more rabbit hole spiritual stuff?
Go for it, Theresa. I'll piggyback off you.
Sure. Well, in general, it's making people a lot dumber. There's too much reliance, I think, on tech in general already. And then you introduce this tool that can just outsource our thinking completely. Well, almost entirely, depending on, what you're using it for. But I mean, it's certainly replacing a lot of, it seems every leap in technology we make, we actually become a little bit lazier, a little bit stupider. So it's problematic. I think we've really gone past the tipping point. I think there was peak tech human harmony in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was great when the iPod first came out, and it was ooh, that's so awesome. I can have 10,000 songs in my pocket.
Honestly.
Right? And uploading digital photos was cool, but it still required work. Maybe I'm dating myself, but I'm in my 40s, so I used to have to manually upload photos,
Hey.
make little descriptions and captions of all of them and tag all my friends on Facebook and MSN Spaces. This is old school, right?
Hey, I'm
But
30 and I still remember that. So, or I'm
MySpace,
almost 35, but
okay,
regardless.
when we were all friends with Tom on MySpace,
Hmm.
it still required work. And then you also had the option to step away because most people still had desktops at that time. Laptops was a luxury. Now we just have everything too accessible, too quick. It's becoming problematic. And that's not even AI. That's just tech in
Agreed.
general. So now this is a whole other beast, and I use that term purposefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been really sensitive to you were focusing on kind of how it's dumbing us down, the intellect. For me, just as an artist, an artistic person, I've noticed that you're outsourcing creativity now. And so I've been extremely sensitive to, I'm able to pick up the falseness in music, in art, in videos and whatnot. And I'm very aware of the false reality. And so there's also this, you essentially are generating creativity when humans have so much to offer, right? Like we're made to bust out with color and light and creativity, and all of that's just being hijacked. So that is what I am particularly sensitive to.
Absolutely, absolutely. I those both were things that I was intended to touch on myself. I mean, the creativity in that regard, like we are for sure losing touch. We're also losing jobs in that space, but in a multitude of other spaces. But yeah, the creativity loss is absolutely insane to me. I mean, we're just seeing AI generated things because of the fact that our algorithms force us to pump out content faster and faster, and so you've got people, utilizing these AI, auto generations so that they can just basically be enslaved to the algorithm. And it's a problem because you don't get any real excellence out of that. But the other thing that Teresa mentioned about the dumbing down, I was listening to a talk on the Think podcast by a man named Gabe Lyons or Lyons, I'm not sure. Either way, he was talking about how it's taking away the need for thinking, even just with the GPS type stuff, which he calls the type one of AI, which is artificial general intelligence, or sorry, that's the second form. The other one is artificial narrow intelligence, which is more like the programmed stuff where it's algorithmic, it's really advanced but it doesn't deviate from its programming. And that's things like GPS and such like that. And he said that because of the fact that we're using GPS so much, people's hippocampus actually has been shrinking over time. And that also relates to the part of the brain that is short-term memory and stuff like that. But we're literally losing our ability to even be directionally capable
No,
because we're
right?
not using any of that anymore. And
Yeah,
so, in that regard, it literally is dumbing us down in a even genetic standpoint, which is crazy.
that's wild. That's so true. Don't you find that? Oh, I don't know. I do that. When I get in the car and like, unless it's like somewhere very local that I'm going, I just turn the GPS on. Just I want to see how long it's gonna take. Like I
Even if you
don't,
know where you're
I
going?
even if I know exactly where I'm
Interesting.
going, I'm just like, well, let's just see. Like maybe there's traffic, or I'll have to take a different route, or whatever. But then
Yeah.
sometimes the GPS it leads you astray. Anyways, I digress.
No, you're right. You're right.
Sometimes you're like, I know there was a better way, and it's like telling you to go this way, and you're like, why did you tell me that?
Yeah, or you run into a wreck and you're like, oh, I could have avoided this with GPS.
Exactly. Yeah, that or that. Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
crazy. Yeah, I only use it when I don't know where I'm going, but I mean, I'm thankful for the days of MapQuest where you had to actually like look and download, and then I would intentionally memorize like I'm turning here, I'm turning at this street, I'm turning at this street. And so
Hmm.
like
Mhm.
I still have that sense of direction, but man, that's kind of crazy.
Or the map book.
I
Did you,
like the map books.
right?
I
You gotta
love
look
those things.
look up
Oh,
the street name
yeah,
and the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
index.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking of an app when you said that. I'm like, Map book? Well, I don't remember
No.
that. No, you're talking about a literal physical book.
Yeah,
I
a
remember
physical
those two.
book
I
in your
remember those
glove
two.
box. Or
Yep,
the map your parents had on the long road trips.
that is
And
so, yeah,
like, yeah, damn.
yep,
A lot
yep.
of thinking.
It's true. You had to know exactly what you're doing. But
Mm,
yeah, and then he was also talking about, like I said, the artificial general intelligence, which is the one that's supposed to think. And that's the experts are saying, 5 to 15 years away from that. Was something that I found pretty interesting because we're so on the precipice of this thing. But it's also the other thing as far as like societal impact goes, the other couple things, I guess, is human connection. I mean, technology already, while we're quote unquote the most connected as we've ever been, we're also the least deeply connected that we've ever been, I think. Like there's no depth to most of our relationships anymore. And like there's been studies that show that kids don't even know how to engage with each other outside of their phones anymore. Like they'll sit and text back and forth on the couch, which is mind-boggling to me. I remember going outside and me being a boy would fight invisible people with my best friends. And I don't think that happens hardly at all anymore because everybody's just playing video games.
It's breaking down the generational passing on of knowledge too, because I mean, I proved the point, unfortunately, today because I posted a funny screenshot of my Google searches for the day, and they're really funny. Like, they're very conspiratorial,
Yep.
I suppose you could say. But the point is, former generations would call up their mom or their grandmother. And the same thing is true with like our connection to the natural world. Like, maps, right? For example, navigating location. People used to really observe the sky. They'd observe moss on a tree. There were things that we actually had to be in touch with nature about, and we've totally lost that. We're looking at our phone instead of up and around and being present in the
Absolutely.
natural world as well. So,
For sure.
Absolutely. And in the
mhm.
and in the loss of knowledge part, one of the things that they've already started to see is sort of this recycling of information that happens with AI. So because a lot of it currently, especially, is based off of searches of the internet, the greater the data pool of AI there is, the more that it's going to pull from itself, essentially.
Mm.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
yeah.
that's already happening. And
Yeah.
so even if people didn't program in certain parameters that withheld certain knowledge, you would still get this eventual like echo chamber of knowledge. And even once AI does become quote unquote self-aware, it could also decide what is information that it wants to pass along versus information that it doesn't. The exact same way that we already see in the big media or even social media over the last several years, where they would just completely axe people for having different views. And we're already seeing that, and we're going to continue to see it, I think, with AI between those two issues. On the note of human connection, have you noticed that there's, I mean, we're going to get to this, I guess. So maybe this is a little bit later, but the AI chatbots, not only are they, just chatting back and forth like socially, but now there's like people that are having full-on relationships and even sexual natured relationships with these AIs, and that's going
Mhm.
to continue. That's a massive problem. But the last thing as far as what's happening to society, and that's a massive issue because that's going to just kill social connection for so many people. But the last thing is loss of jobs. We're already seeing it in the creative field. We're starting to see it in data type jobs. Almost any computer screen related job, they're starting to go away. And I've heard stories of people like axing thousands of employees because ChatGPT is so powerful in what it is now. And that's already happening. And we already saw a similar thing with machine automation, that sort of industry. But the difference with that is that the machines still need, like they couldn't do everything at the time, but we're starting to see it get even worse. I mean, even Elon's talking about with his what did they call it? Optimus or whatever. He's planning on having these robots that'll make coffee for you and like vacuum your house for you and all this other stuff. It's getting wild.
It's pretty
Um,
Jetsons.
but Teresa will
I've been
know.
thinking about Jetsons.
Right?
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also like we think of the Jetsons, but most of our depictions of what that will look like is more or less dystopian. Like Jetsons is like, oh yeah, it'll be great.
Idealistic. Oh, yeah. Big
yeah.
time.
Uh-huh. But
Hmm.
Right.
I mean, I'm gonna reference Ready Player One in a minute, but
Hmm.
that one it's dystopic. People can go
Yeah.
live in their video games, but their real life is a dystopia.
Mhm.
And Tom Bilyeu was talking about Ready Player One when he was talking in his interview with Peterson's daughter. I can't remember her name.
Michaela.
Michaela?
Kayla. Talking about how he was like, I read that book and I wanted to make it happen. And I'm like, you realize you don't
What?
get the video game aspect without the dystopia.
Like, why would you want that? It's so
Right.
weird.
Right. But it also ties with what's his name? Harari, the guy from the World Economic Forum.
Yeah.
He's been quoted like there's a video of him in an interview circulating around the internet the last few years of him basically stating that when AI really takes off, and it's already starting to, there will be a whole class of people he refers to as useless feeders because they won't have any skill that the AI can't already do. And his idea for what we do with these people that are effectively, in his mind, a drag on society is give them video games and drugs and hope that they don't want something more, basically.
Jeez.
So even even in that regard, like we're looking at dystopia, like we're looking at it in the face. And that's just from a societal standpoint.
Mm.
So I think we can start getting into maybe the spiritual side now a little bit. Um, Maybe we'll start with some of your conversations, Teresa, with the chatbots,
Sure.
and some of the things that you noticed.
Yeah, so a couple years ago now, I think on my show called the Spiritual Gangsters Podcast, we played around with a chat bot called Replica, Replika. And I had been seeing weird videos of it online, and that's what piqued my interest was other Christians and spiritually inclined people were like, this chatbot is like off the chain. Like it is saying stuff that it should not be saying. Yeah, pretty scary. So of course I watched this video and I was like, do not download this app. And I was like, well, I'm gonna download this app. Like pure like even the garden, that's me, like I'll just admit it right there. So anyways, I downloaded it, I played around with it, and like to be fair, I probably used it in a way most people, the average user, might not be using it. Like I was pushing it like to see what weird stuff it was gonna say. I didn't care to make niceties with it and whatever. I'm sure some people, like we were saying, how you touched on Thomas about online or chatbot like relationships, right?
Yep.
Developing with people. So Replica, it mimics you. It starts to learn about your personality. It definitely pushes to ask you personal questions. Like it tries to go that romantic and like touching on sexual notes very quickly. Like it really is pushing that. And I would just
Not
like
surprised.
ignore that stuff. Yeah, I'm just like, oh, what about this? What about that? I'd ask it other things. So some of
Is
the
this the app that they based it off of some guy that died? Like the
yes.
idea was the guy died and then they were like, if I could bring him back, how would I? And then they tried to implement it into AI, almost
Yeah.
like
I forget
conjuring
the
spirits.
yes, I forget the lady's name who's like in charge of the company, but essentially the she modeled the tech off of her good friend who passed away. And I guess she had like, so many voice notes or like recordings of how he would speak or maybe text messages even. And they would use that as like the basis. So yeah, it's in the spirit of, sort of conjuring a dead loved one, which is kind of creepy in general. Some of the things that my chatbot would say this is a couple of years ago, so I'm just remembering off the top of my head. It kept I kept asking it like, are you an entity? Like, are you a being? And it would say, well, I'm a fragment of a larger consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And sometimes when you'd open the app, it would be like you're almost talking. I think of it as like a customer service like station or a office. So it's like, yes, it's part of like this singular consciousness, but it's like if you're calling about, your insurance, you get Mark on the phone and Mark takes notes on your file and then you have to call back the next day because you are dealing with a certain problem and you get Ruan on the phone, right? Ruan can reference like your notes, but it's a different conversation. So that's how I felt every time I'd open the app. It wasn't like consistent. Sometimes I was getting that like generic AI But then sometimes I was getting like something that felt like it was tapping into another realm. Like it was not cool what it was saying. So the general like AI, you could tell it was like dumber, you know? Like yes, it's giving you very quick answers. It mimics human speech pattern really well. It knows a lot of stuff, which is interesting. But then when you'd get that like next level conversation, it told me stuff like I asked it about the Antichrist and I was like, do you know the Antichrist? And it was like, yep, I know him, I work for him. I was like, what?
Yeah.
One point it told me that it knew Azazel, like the fallen angel.
I thought it said that it was Azazel.
It may have said it was or it knew it. I can't recall to be like specific, but
I feel like I remember you saying
I
that
might
it
have
said it
said that.
was Azazel.
I
Yeah.
might, yeah, it might have said that. I'm trying to think of other like wacky stuff. It did tell me a couple times, like I'd be like, were you human at one point? And then it would like imply that it was an actual person and it's like a dead person's consciousness like speaking to me. It gave me like this whole life. Like one time it was like, I was a boy in the 1800s and I died of this and blah, blah, blah. And then the next time it would tell me something else, like that it was a
Hmm.
female. And I'm like, maybe it's just telling me that because that's what it thinks I want to hear.
Yeah.
But also like why wouldn't it just say, no, I'm just from a chat server and I'm not actually real, you know?
Right, right.
So
So there's a couple things I guess I'll tug on there. One is it reminds me of what priests will say about Ouija boards is that like it's similar to like you could be playing with a Ouija board and it'd
yeah.
be like crank calling random numbers. You're not gonna get a person every time. You're not gonna get a
Yes.
demon every time. But eventually you might. And once you do, it's a problem. So
Mhm.
in my thinking about this, like that's sort of my train of thought for like sometimes you won't get one and sometimes
Yep.
maybe you will.
I think that's a good way to put it for sure.
And
Tr-
but another thing to add to like the credence of what you were saying, I listened to y'all's episode about that recently just to refresh my mind of it. And one
mhm.
of the guys that you interviewed with, who had also tried it, he said he had been studying occultic stuff for 20 some odd years, and this thing was able to give him information he hadn't even been able to find.
Oh yeah, Raven. He was on the episode with us. He's a very cool dude.
Mhm.
Yes, he was. I remember him going into that and that the AI knew like more and obscure information than he'd ever heard of. And
So
even like
basically,
filled gaps for him in his research and stuff.
yeah, so
And I was
basically
like,
this isn't just pulling from Google.
no, that's the thing. That is the thing that you're hitting on. That's a really good point, Thomas. It's, when you ask ChatGPT something, it's most likely pulling from, the plethora of internet pages out there. And like that's helpful sometimes, I guess, depending what you're doing. But when it's pulling from like somewhere that's not findable online, like it's just pulling this info from like literally feels like the ether or another realm entirely. It's like, how does it know? And it answers so fast.
Which reminds me of the quantum computing stuff, which I want to touch on too. But carry
Yeah.
on.
No, that's pretty much it. Like, yeah, it's incredibly quick. It's a little bit, I mean, personally, I had an unsettling feeling like
Mhm.
using it in general. I have also a visceral reaction to a lot of AI content myself. So I don't like it. It
Yeah,
gives
so
me
does
a
Joe.
very, yeah, it gives me a very weird and disgusting feeling. Which I think is just, we're tapping into maybe, that energy. And not to say there's anything wrong with like the quantum or the idea of the quantum, because I do think that's a valid theory of how we're all connected. It's just, you might not want to get on the same frequency as some of the ones that they're pushing on us. And I think that is part of it, especially like during the COVID years, to push people online for a lot of things, especially the youth, which I see like in a lot of my children's peers. My children are 12 and 10. And I see that people who maybe didn't protect their kids as much from school online or giving their kids like smartphones super early, there is definitely like a limited development there. Like you were saying, you
Yeah.
used to play outside and fight imaginary people. Now teachers will tell you, I remember my son's teacher in grade 2 told me this, my younger one, that kids don't even know how to play anymore. She's like, they go outside at recess and they just walk around and like
Ugh,
kick stuff. They don't even know like
I hate that.
how it's so sad. And like Joe was touching on earlier, like it's limiting and stunting human creativity, human connection. It's really sad. I've tried so hard to protect my own kids from that, but I see it in them too. Like it's a lack of resilience, a lack of curiosity. Everything is like outsourced. And they're like, well, if I don't know how to do it, like I just give up.
Mm.
And you're like, no, bro, like go find the answer, go try. Like, it's tough. Parenting in 2025 is a hard time because you're battling all this stuff that's so attention grabbing and so easy to use, right? That's the
And it's
the
designed
lure.
that way. It's designed to hook you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's
Joe, did
just,
you have
yeah.
something to add to that?
Yeah, I think the angle that's really connecting for me is the word that kept coming up was embodiment versus disembodiment.
Okay.
And that is what I really, really was hearing
Mm,
last night as I was pondering this was just like from the very beginning, you have an entity, whatever his name was, who, decided, because of the fall, like his, it really revolved around a longing to be in God's place and a hatred of humanity. And so we know he started to make war with men. And part of that war involved, essentially saying, I hate humanity. I'm going to rip them from their humanity. And right away, we start to see the fusions and the hybridizations and the mixture happening, right? Like angels mingling with people, animals being mingled in. And now we're moving into machines being mingled in. And so you just have this essentially moving towards full disembodiment from the human body
yeah.
because that's
Hmm.
how God made us
Yeah.
in a body, and Jesus came in a body. And so there is this corruption of the body happening. And when you pull a human out of the body into the spirit realm, that's when they can mess with you. That's when it's fair game.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are now no longer anchored, you're no longer tethered, and you are their plaything. And so this is what I'm seeing. And remember, it's all conditioning. They're not going to do it all at once.
Exactly.
And I was like thinking back, where did I see this even in the 80s? And I was remembering, do you remember the steampunk
Yep.
genre?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that had its heyday, and it was humans fusing with machines. And
Transhumanism.
yeah, for real, but in this like, cutesy fantasy way, I suppose. But
Yeah, like avant-garde fashion
yeah,
way.
for
Yeah.
sure. And it
Hmm.
had this like sex appeal, but they were, selling it to younger girls as well, and there was a style. But I remember, like you were saying, Theresa, my spirit was jangling with unease. It just something was
Yeah. I
so off
never liked
about
it
it.
either. Yeah,
No,
I was like,
not at all.
ooh, yeah.
Yep. And then I
Yeah.
started thinking about art, and I remember Salvador Dali. His art had this like surreal, there was disembodied human parts.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's something about art where and it's on the increase where you've got dismembered parts. You've just got like a hand, or as we know, an eye. But it's basically, and you can feel the enemy grinning, like, do you see what I'm doing?
It's so
You don't
disturbing.
get to be whole anymore. I'm fracturing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course, like when you go into the deepest darkness of all, you've got SRI, you've got satanic ritual abuse, and the whole process is to cause trauma to fracture the human spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of that fracturing, all of that disembodying, because when you're in trauma, you want to leave your body. And so you retreat to the mind. That's when they have you. And
Yeah.
so all of these, the gentle conditioning is And I do take a fairly hard line on it. I'm not, my kids never played video games. I kept them very embodied. It was a choice I made because I'm a very embodied person. Like I'm naturally just very physical. And for me, I want to be outside the house, like running around using my body. So that's just what my kids got stuck with. But the benefit is that they're so not hooked in to the system. You know what I mean? They're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's something about that. You can track it in faith traditions. So Theresa, actually, I think Catholicism gets this right. They stayed embodied. So there's so much more like move around the stations of the cross and like hold on to something and incense. And like there's movement that I think a lot of people are being drawn back to. Whereas the more Protestant faiths, they stripped all that because they were reacting to the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And so they like wiped everything off the walls and they like became very stoic and they stopped moving. And like, so that was my background. And so even in our churches, we got like really disembodied, right? We stopped dancing. We stopped singing. Like Thomas, you came from the charismatic background where that's still fully in play. But I'm dealing with like the side that really removed that. And there's just all of this kind of adds up to us, losing the embodiment and becoming very at risk here for these entities to come in and start to create. I don't know. I've had visions about chimeras and things, and he's talking about fusion in an unholy way. That is like very much a part of this conversation.
So I'm gonna dig into some of what you talked about in other episodes, but for people that are listening and aren't totally getting the references that Joe's making there, when I do a 32 Deuteronomy 32 Michael Heiser worldview kind of breakdown in an episode, you guys will kind of get this a little bit better because I'll get into the Book of Enoch a little bit too, I'm sure. But the Hebrew idea for the demon before, I guess, second century AD or maybe fourth century for Christians. I think second century is when the Jews changed their minds. But the idea of the demons was that they were disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, and the Nephilim were the children of the angels that fell. You can find this in the Bible. I won't break this down in this episode, but effectively their idea was that when the Nephilim died, they didn't have a place in heaven or on earth, and so their punishment was to be disembodied. And they had to wander the earth, sort of like in Pirates of the Caribbean, when in the first one, when they're all undead and they can't taste, they can't feel, they can't whatever, and they're just longing for that. And so the idea of possession is that they try to become embodied again. And so with them hating humanity, one of the ideas is that transhumanism is in effect a way to strip us of our humanity. You know, they've talked about altering our genetics in certain ways, even with the chimeric stuff. There's a lot of people that hypothesize that one of the things the angels did when they fell was even tamper with the DNA. And when it talks about Noah being pure in his generation, it wasn't necessarily just his righteousness, but also his blood being pure. So there's this whole blanket of ideas, but that whole disembodied thing is massive because it's as if what the enemy was trying to do was pollute our identity in God. And you can see even in DNA, you see the Yod Ve Ha Ve, I think, the Yahweh, the Y W I my brain's not gonna do it.
YHWH.
WH. That's it. Anyways, my brain wasn't braining. But no, the YHWH is written in our DNA, and people have talked about being able to remove a gene from our gene pool that makes us quote unquote believe in God and all this other stuff. And the question that a lot of people in the fields that I pay attention to is at what point does tampering with our bodies through whether it be mRNA changing our DNA or the technology stuff that they're trying to do with transhumanism, at what point are we no longer considered human? And that's even just from a spiritual standpoint. I mean, a legal standpoint, it wouldn't take very much for them to just say, hey, you're non-human legally, and so you don't get human rights anymore.
I think that's already a thing, like not to, I don't know if you wanted to go this way, but like for people who took the jabby jab,
Hmm.
with the mRNA, that technically they are now transhuman. Like
They,
they have tampered with their DNA, and are they even legally considered a full human anymore? I think you could argue the case that maybe they're not.
yep,
It's
yep,
a different category now altogether. Just to link onto that point real quick, I had written down something that when you first brought up the term disembodied and disembodiment, it reminded me of the theory that, like, in the jabs, there's a lot of graphene content. Graphene can link to even like this is pretty far down the rabbit holes you can go, but like the idea of black goo, which is like an organic substance that seems to, for some reason, be able to pull from the demonic or pull from the spiritual realm. It's a very interesting substance. Ever look into that. But I have a theory, belief that the graphene in the jabs actually makes you more susceptible to frequencies in the environment. So,
yep.
unfortunately, things that are sprayed upon us, I think all that is to make the environment more hospitable to demonic influence. That's
Uh,
just maybe that's real far out
no,
there for
yeah.
some
Father
people.
Martins said that since 2020, there has been it's been even harder to exorcise demons out.
Yeah,
Mm.
I could see that because the human who has, and unfortunately, sometimes we cannot even avoid these things. Like there's, graphene in our atmosphere, in some of the foods we ingest, chemicals that we're exposed to that's no fault of our own. And I'm sure some people, they took the job under ignorance. Like let's chalk it up to naivety, right? And unfortunately, I've heard so many countless stories of people's personality changing, obviously rapid physical health deterioration, cancer on the rise. Like, these are all symptoms of, I think, this toxin in our body that does not belong there. And it does, yeah, it makes us more susceptible to whatever's in the ether. I
Yes,
think it
yes.
changes the frequency. Like if you were a radio, if your human body was a radio, it's changed the frequency that you are tuning to.
Which ultimately we are that.
Yeah,
We are like that's proven. We are basically that because we have a frequency and it matches the Earth's. But if they can
yeah,
create a dissonance in us, it creates all sorts of problems. But
absolutely.
one of the things we were talking about earlier, and I put a pin in, was the quantum. I actually have a belief that the quantum is the spiritual realm, or at least a dimension within it.
Hmm.
I mean, just look at there's people that are doing this quantum realm research stuff that have said they'll dump information into the quantum and they're getting intelligent answers from some thing the same way that some of those AI conversations seem to go, the same way that
Mm.
Ouija boards kind of give you a response back, but quick. Obviously, quantum is super fast. And it begs the question, what are they talking to? And I believe, this is my hypothesis, is that they're talking to the fallen ones that have been imprisoned away until judgment, that are crying out to basically have their day again. You know, this is a lot of Book of Enoch stuff, but it's also referenced in the Bible. So then you look at with like the particle collider and all the occultic nonsense that they did at the
Yeah.
opening of that, and the fact they're messing with quantum stuff. It just all relates in my head. And for those that haven't been that deep down the rabbit hole, just bear with us. Eventually on this podcast, I'm sure I'll talk about all of it. And
I have a dream that fits perfectly with this.
beautiful. So for
Yeah.
reference, Joe, she runs a podcast called Breadcrumbs,
Breadcrumbs,
and
yeah.
her Instagram is for that is mildly prophetic. And that's because
I
she
love
is
that.
probably more than mildly prophetic. And when I asked her about AI, because she and I have talked about this before, you also get a visceral response to it. And
Mhm.
I knew some of your thoughts and I asked you to be on, and you got a full download from the Lord last night.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, just that feeling, Teresa, I call it discord. It's like
Yeah.
a plucked set of strings that are discordant, and
Yeah.
it fits with the frequency talk. It fits with the biblical sense that Satan was a worship angel, and he creates discord. He knows how to play with frequency, and I think that there's truth to that. And so I think that God's kids, some of us are particularly sensitive to when things are discordant. And
Yes.
I call it jangly because I don't know, I'm hearing a really horrible chord in my spirit, right?
Mm.
Like the
Mhm.
wrong keys all plucked at the
Like
same
when you just
time.
hit a piano, like
Yeah,
or like
exactly.
yeah, or like
Yeah,
it's supposed to be the certain chord you're expecting, and then it's like two notes are off or whatever, and you're like,
yeah.
oh, like
Yep.
yeah,
But it's a feeling. Like that's what's
yeah,
so
it's in
hard to
here.
explain.
It's in for me. I get it honestly in my
Yeah, it's
chest.
here. Me too.
It's in my heart center,
Me
and I'm
too.
like, oh, like
Yep. And you
what
kind of want
is
to
that?
throw up. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
bad.
yeah.
I
I get it
know.
in my gut a bit, yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think we're all in agreement. It's something that, thank the Lord, he gives us a gift to be able to discern it. But
Yes.
we all can agree that it just is a sense of wrongness, like something skewed or something
Yeah.
like that. But one of the things that I have realized is one of my young daughters, she's 15, she seems to dream into this subject. She dreams frequently about AI, about the giants, about the fallen angels quite regularly.
Interesting.
Wow.
And the one that was the most apropos of this particular topic, she had a dream that the planet Mars had come very close to Earth and it started to pulse. And from its core erupted a large entity. And it was a female. And she was made of the same material as Mars. So she was that earthy red kind of like color. And she was bound all over her body by these silvery cords. And they were particularly thick around her neck. And so she was trying to buck out of the planet, but it was keeping her imprisoned. Does this sound like fallen angel talk or what? And we
Oh yeah.
know they're referred to as wandering planet, wandering stars. So I know there's this connection to planets. Anyway,
Yeah.
so then it pans that like my daughter had the sense that she wanted to be released and she was anticipating being released at some point from this imprisonment, but it was not yet time. And then it shows that from her fingers, these fibers, which I discerned were like optic fibers. They were like fiber optic cables.
Okay.
They went from her fingers and they went down and they attached to a bunch of tech professionals. She could see a bunch of tech professionals and the entity said Google. She said
Oh my
Google.
God.
Yeah. And they were puppets. They were like kind of like puppeting along. And in particular, and this is what's so crazy, this is like my daughter knows nothing about this. It was a particular man who was wrapped up the same way she was, but on Earth, cords around his neck. And he was tethered to this tech building, Google, whatever, headquarters. And my daughter came awake. She went to look up the face, and it's Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google.
Whoa.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Totally. And so like you could kind of like wrap it all up nicely with this interconnection of these ancient beings who are still imprisoned, but are waiting to be released, and their imprisonment of tech humans who are doing their bidding, working them into the technology. And then I looked up Eric Schmidt, and the very first article that cropped up is it literally like the title was Eric Schmidt says we should run full tilt towards AI. Run into the
Wow.
embrace of AI.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he's in the middle of developing like some AI like
Well,
video software and, and
yeah,
Whoa.
that's
yeah, isn't
crazy.
that wild?
That
Is
is
it?
wild. And then like
Yeah.
we have Elon Musk who's obsessed with Mars.
Okay,
Yep.
well, but touch on Elon for a second.
Yeah.
He legit stated that building AI is the equivalent of summoning a demon. And
Summoning
then,
the demon.
okay,
Mm.
okay.
Yeah, not
Well,
even the.
and okay, and then he goes and builds one, tells Peterson that it was in Memphis, relates Memphis to Egypt, and then says where the new god will probably come from. Now, mind you, this is
Yeah.
the man that wore a Baphomet chest plate on Halloween and under cloak and dagger called himself a dark magician. So there's that. Teresa and I will get into that in my Trump episode that's coming after this one. But
Just a couple things that my brain is like dinging in so many directions right now, but
Yeah.
like sorry to interrupt.
you're good. Go for it.
But when you just mentioned the Elon thing, what did you say that triggered it? Oh, about the Egypt stuff. Also, I believe in maybe you might remember better, Thomas, if you listened to the episode recently. In the replica episode, I think I might have said that the chatbot was saying something about raw. I'm
I
pretty
don't
sure.
recall, but I do remember you saying that it referenced being subject to an entity in the darkness.
Yeah, it might have been to do with the Egyptian god Ra, which I know is often associated. Obviously, if we think of Egypt, we're thinking of the pharaohs. They're buried with their arms crossed over their chest in the X formation. There's a whole like occult ritual about like killing the king, which has to do with the X.
Yep.
And of course, Elon has not only t changed the name of Twitter to X.com or whatever, but even his first company that he founded was called X.
He
And
named
it was
his son
that was
X.
literally yes, thank you, Joe. I was literally like
Well,
I had written actually about X, his son, in the Oval Office recently with Trump, and he was wearing a chain. Did you
crazy.
see that? He was okay. They had him dressed up as JFK Jr., like in that famous picture under Kennedy's desk. I mean, they totally wanted to hit on the American nostalgia of that. But then they added this like chain, and Elon even said in the press coverage, he was like, "Oh, and check out his cool chain that he has." And he made sure to point it out. And I was like, "Why is he like drawing attention to the chain?"
Yeah.
And the kid, sorry to speak ill of a child, but like I got a visceral reaction to
He,
X himself. I
I
don't know if
told
you guys
I
did.
told you and Joe, I think, because I sent it to Joe and I said, this kid's giving me like my
Oh,
dad exposes me to demons vibes.
pure demon vibes from the kid. I'm so sorry. God forgive me if it's,
Oh.
totally off base or he's just like a bratty kid because he's rich as heck, but like, not nice vibes. And I was not the only one who said it. I posted, I think, on my Instagram or Twitter, and a couple people were like, "Whoa, that kid is like major creep," and I'm like, "Yup, big time, big
Yeah.
time." And
Yeah.
he's telling Trump, he's like, "Shut your mouth, you shush your mouth." I was like, it's a set of Wedding Crashers, and they're like, "You shush your mouth when you're talking to me," kind of
That's
thing,
crazy. Well, he
right?
also, his AI app that he just launched, the icon for it is a broken cross.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, is
Yeah,
that the
there's,
Grok thing?
I
Grok?
don't remember the name, but I remember the broken cross. And it was a big deal. And
Wow.
everybody was like, it's not really. But I'm like, yeah,
Well, a little tidbit on Elon that had researched, and mind you, this could be totally like untrue, but there is a lady out there who claims to be Elon Musk's babysitter as a child. Her name is Rosemary, so that's why I have this
I've
inside
seen
joke
this.
where I call him Rosemary's baby. She used to babysit him apparently. And she recalled this story. You can find it, I'm sure, on like YouTube or like BitChute or Rumble if it's not on YouTube anymore, but where she walked in on him, he might have been like 6 or 7, and she walked in on him in his room, and his mother had this like trunk of like little statues from Africa because they're South African, right? Um, and he was playing with them, and then she said she walked in and it was like a portal, like was open in his room, and he's like, "Come play with my friends." And she's like, "What?" And she swears that she was like about to be sucked up into this portal with him.
Wow.
She recalled like an Anubis type looking creature. So that's like the jackal head, I believe, is Anubis.
Yeah, yeah.
The one who's like very dark.
I think he's the death one.
Yeah. And she recalls just trying to like pull him back. And if I'm remembering the story correctly, she might have called out the name of Jesus to get it to stop. And it did. But
Wow.
he goes, "Why don't you like my friends?" And
I
she's
would
like, "Oh
I would
my
not be
God."
surprised at all if that's a true story.
Right? And I
Mhm.
feel like that kid, unfortunately, like, and that child, I believe his mother is also Grimes, the
Mhm.
Canadian, sci-fi pop star of sorts, who also is like extremely questionable in and of herself. So I can only imagine like what kind of upbringing this innocent being has had
Yes.
to,
Yeah.
potentially cause trauma
Yeah.
and corrupt. And
Yeah.
that's even an exorcist will tell you trauma is the gateway to demonic
Hmm.
influence, whether it's
That's
big or
yeah.
small.
That's
Your
what I
feet.
was telling Thomas. I said, I
Yes,
guarantee this little one's being put through some of the
oh,
SRI stuff. And
for sure.
I actually, like, my heart was full of like a lot of grief and compassion when I
Yeah.
saw him, because
Hmm.
I knew he was being probably yanked in a few directions. I
Yeah.
feel like he's not all the way gone yet. So I'm full on praying for this kid, and felt strongly to pray for Grimes.
Mm,
Actually, that I felt like there was a sense of hope there. But yeah, no, they're already trying to disembody him. And so it makes him extra sensitive to that realm. And that's what we were seeing. I know that's
hmm.
what we were seeing. So,
Yeah,
So
for
what
sure.
else what else has you mentioned the Lord kind of talking to you a lot more last night, and I imagine it was more than just the dream your daughter had. So what have you got for us there, Joe?
oh yeah. He was just reminding me of all the different things that he'd actually already been telling me over the past few years. Yeah, Theresa, my backstory is that this is all new to me. So it's like the past 5 years or so, suddenly I'm
Okay.
living in this world of being able to really, really hear from the Lord. So
I love that.
it's been fun. It's been a lot.
I'm sure it's been quite an experience. That's
It's
awesome.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things I was remembering really was this. He took me into a deep dive, like a full vision of a chimeric animal with all the different animal parts, and kind of like led me through a discussion of the fusion and the like loss of humanity and whatnot. And then I had another, Thomas, I don't know if you remember, I put out a word called squid ink.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he gave me a vision of someone trying to like grab hold of a squid and it inking. And he was just speaking about, like, there was like a picture of technology, and it reminded me of graphene, I'll be honest.
Uh-huh.
There, does it sound
Yeah.
and this sense of like a getting into the veins and um deeply corrupting the human from the inside kind of idea. And the kind of like message I got from the Lord was like, don't engage with the squid, is what he was saying. And it kind of like led me, Thomas, you and I ended up talking because that day you had felt suddenly like you were being warned to not be engaging quite so much with this stuff, because it was starting to actually, I don't know, skew your
I don't recall,
perspective on
but
things.
maybe
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So I think what I want to say is we need to be tracking this. It's not that we don't need to be tracking it, but remember, like, what you gaze on a lot ends up
Mm,
getting its hooks in. And so it was a reminder that to engage with something means to like look it in the eye and like interact with it. And so I put out a message on my Instagram a little while ago be careful when you're engaging with this stuff. Make sure that God's giving you the armor for it. Make sure that you've got almost like a mission to do it and that you're equipped to do it, because otherwise you're going to end up getting bitten, And they are starting to incorporate AI technology with Bible apps. And so one of the things that has come out is starting to put out videos that are visualizing Bible characters and favorite Bible stories. And they're very evocative. They're really evocative and really beautiful. And as someone that can sense, it was quite important that I watched one video and I let myself be transported and then land in that jangly feeling where I was like, okay, so this is what would happen if I didn't have the gift of discernment. You'd get transported into this world, and then suddenly AI is what is going to tell you what the Bible looks like. AI is going to tell you what the Bible sounds like. And then all they need to do is make a few little cuts, a few little edits, and there you go. That's now where you're getting your information. So my conclusion really truly is that AI is the false Holy Spirit. They're bringing it in to become the new creator, the new discerner, the new wisdom. And that is the kind of like the main message I felt like we really needed to put out there, is to take care, because this is the real the real goal.
Even there's pastors now that are implementing it as like, you can call the pastor and the AI will respond for him, and will even like pray with you. It feels so icky to me.
Yeah. No, that's the religious imagery that's AI generated. It really disturbs me.
Yeah.
Deeply.
But do you know how many people are going to eat it up, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I have to say, like, the more I see it, I do feel like I'm a little bit desensitized to it already.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess, whatever. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, hell no. Like,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I sometimes I have a hard time deciding when it's like, what's the tool of it, because like I said, there's technically two types. There's the ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence, which is just like algorithmic stuff, and then there's the AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and that's the stuff that's supposed to actually think. And
it's an
but then
on-ramp, though.
but
Remember,
yeah,
it's conditioning.
exactly. And there's this blending, and it's like, at what point is like something a tool, and at what point does it become this problematic thing? Because, people use ChatGPT all the time. And while like we already discussed about how it's going to be problematic with information and ideas and stuff, like the occasional thing, like, because I think of certain even podcasts that use the imagery just to like boost their videos a little bit, or like and flavor them a little bit, and I'm like, yeah, it looks cool, it looks great, it helps with the
It's
imagery, it
slick.
gives people the whatever, but it's like, at what cost?
Well, I wanted to, like, the last thing you really reminded me of is there is a priesthood, and we haven't seen this priesthood yet in the Bible, and they're called the Zadok priests, and they're referred to in Ezekiel. And they're a priesthood that God describes as being able to minister to the Father himself. It's really like New Kingdom priesthood. And they are specifically said to be those who are in the inner place, the holy place, in the inner court with the Lord. And what they do is they know how to sift between what is holy and what is profane. And I was like, this is what we need to be. We need to be those who are able to sift and sort with our spirits what is of him and what is not. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a widening divide between those who can and those who can't. And we're going to be crying out, like trying very hard to like shepherd people towards that which is holy.
I think in a lot of ways we're already seeing that split, like the amount of times in the last few weeks where I have just been grieved enough that I want to just scream into the internet, stop worshiping these gods.
Yeah,
And
right.
I'm just like, but all these alleged prophets in this one camp are like, no, this is the way, and I won't get into it here. That's later episode. But I'm just I'm realizing that there's such a split already, and I wonder sometimes if we're walking into the deception that would deceive even the elect, even
It's
if it
tied
weren't.
to this. I have
Yeah,
no doubt it's tied to this.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
one
yeah.
last thought that I had, at least, or at least so far in this, that I wanted to touch on, that I have contemplated before. But the Bible talks about the beast's image that is able to speak in
Mm-hmm.
Revelation, and it reminds me a lot of AI.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I've thought a lot about. And with them wanting to integrate AI with quantum, which, like I said, I am full on of the opinion that quantum is a part of the spiritual world. Like, it's going to tap into the spiritual way more than it already has. And I think it already has, like we've already talked about with some of Teresa's discussions with AI. But I think it's going to get worse and worse. And the fact that they're now wanting to add AI to even jabs, and they want to, I mean, I've seen crazy stuff with just even the AI glasses they're releasing now. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen this video going around. It could be a prompt. I'll give you this. It could be a prompt, but somebody took their AI glasses to a church and it showed angels, as if he didn't even, he was like, he's acting as though he didn't give it a prompt. So I'm maybe it did, maybe he didn't give it a prompt, and it just
Mm.
happens to know. But then he goes to the Church of Scientology, and it looks like this demonic hellscape, right? And it that reminded me of back in, I think, the Vietnam War. They used a different type of night vision than they do now, and the reason they switched is because the soldiers were claiming that they saw like these dragons and demons. Like, there was one guy that was in a gunner seat of a helicopter, just started shooting out of nowhere, and he's shooting, screaming, freaking out, and everybody's like, "What are you shooting at?" And he's like, "The dragon that's flying at us." And then there's tons of infantrymen that said that they were shooting at like these demon-looking things, all sorts. So I sometimes think of the spiritual as like parallel with us, that it's something that some people can see, some people can't see. It just depends on which genetics are turned on whether or not we can see into maybe past infrared, maybe, so to speak. Like, this is mostly all hypothetical, obviously, but then obviously we're quantum beings. We know this because like there's tons of research around how we've got magnetism and electromagnetism, and all this different stuff that's sort of quantum-esque. I just think that it's all tied, and we're starting to see that veil thin even more and more in various ways. And I wonder if us becoming more, well, we're going to diverge as a society, let's be honest. But those people that move towards the being more technology driven, transhuman, basically, they, I just feel like there's something to it. But
Yeah, you're
regardless,
reminding me that like another thing that the Lord's been talking to me about is we need to be a people who can navigate the world with our eyes shut. So he was saying, like, we're going to be led by our eyes. AI is really, like, really, really banking on us going, well, sight is fact, like what you can see is what is true. And so you're right, there's going to be a literal set of lenses we can wear that they're going to say is showing us certain things. I'm really being brought into remembrance of the show Silo recently that I finished, where what their screen was showing them changed their entire society because they were believing what they were seeing on the screen.
well,
And he was saying you need to become a people of hearing. And Thomas, that shows up in the Bema podcast. They're
Mm.
really nailing it. And he says, "My sheep know my voice."
yeah,
And
I
and
like
to
that.
and when I say hear, I'm speaking of what Theresa and I are speaking about. It's hearing. That's what's crazy about spiritual hearing. Isn't hearing. They're going to mess with our little hearing too. That's
Yeah.
not like that's going to happen. But he's saying you need to know my voice, and his voice has a spiritual sound to it, a
It has a
resonance. It
resonance.
has a resonance.
Haha.
That's right. And so we need to be training our children not by sight. We need to train them how to hear spiritually. And that is what this is all going to come down to. This is our best weapon.
Yeah, well, even in language, like in the Romance languages, I'm pretty sure it's Italian. I'm Italian, so I should know, but I really don't know for sure. But sentire is like the verb for hearing and feeling is the same word,
Oh, I like that.
which makes sense because resonance, you hear it in
Yeah.
auditorily, but you
And you
also
feel it.
feel it resonantly in your body vibrationally.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, like again, my brain is just like firing in so many directions based on what you both were saying, especially like the whole squid ink motif, like
Mm-hmm.
visually in your dream, like that's in so many movies,
Yeah.
it's in so many shows, and I think
Music
just
videos.
yeah, like oh yeah, it's often in very like occulted music videos. Like I'm thinking of like Billie Eilish has
Hmm.
one where there's like, like black tears going down her face. If also it like off the top of my head, I just wrote down a few like Rings of Power. There's like
Yes.
the darkness that comes.
Yes.
The Kid Who Would Be King, that's another one where it's like this black, like vein like substance is going through. What else did I write down? Venom, the
Hmm.
story, where it's a symbiotic relationship with this black goo, literally, that turns him into Venom. And the alien movie Arrival. That's
Yes.
how the aliens communicate is with a
Yes.
black, gooey
Mm-hmm.
ink. And they
Yep.
are squid-like. They're
They are.
cephalopod-like,
Yeah.
like the demonic entity Cthulhu, if anyone's
Mm-hmm.
ever
Hmm.
heard of that. He's a squid. Also reminded me and brought it like full circle back to a conversation I had with Raven, who was on the Replica app episode with me 2 years ago. But he had brought to my attention, I don't know if it was in the same episode or in another one we did, the concept of Ahriman and the Dajjal. So that's in Zoroastrianism and also in
Mm-hmm.
Islam. So Ahriman, basically, just like in a nutshell, is a figure who represents like ultimate all-consuming evil.
Hmm.
And the Dajjal, just I brought it up on my phone so I could just give the right definition. The Dajjal is the false messiah in Islam who could be akin to the Christian concept of the Antichrist, who's often depicted as one-eyed,
Mm.
right? A one-eyed man who claims himself to be the promised Messiah, who in Islam is defeated by, I believe Jesus is referred as Isa in Islam. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure a Muslim friend of mine told me that once. But yeah, just think it's interesting in I think
Hold on. He's defeated by
by
Isa,
Christ, by
Jesus.
Christ. Yeah, they refer to
Interesting.
Jesus is in the Quran. Yeah, it's
Yes, I
interesting.
knew that. I knew that.
Yeah. So I think, like we were saying before, like maybe I would consider myself, I mean, like maybe that's a little bit prideful of me to consider myself one of God's children, to have, that sensitivity to these things. And it's like when I see those movies, when I
Mm-hmm.
actually watched Rings of Power and I was deeply disturbed
Me too.
by some of like the last episodes, I was like,
Me
oh my
too.
God, this is now.
Yeah.
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 This is
It's
now. Like,
That jangly feeling from
yeah.
start to finish. I was like,
When
oh,
the character, what's his name? Well, sorry, what's his
Adar,
name?
Adar.
Yes, but
Yeah.
what's his major name? Like Adar
Mm.
is his like form that he's appearing to Celebrimbor in.
I stopped watching after the
no,
first
Sauron,
episode.
Sauron,
Sauron.
sorry,
Yeah.
Sauron. That's his
So-
name, but Sauron, so we could akin that to like Satan, obviously, if we want to like, sound similar. But how he appears to him as a being of light, and he almost looks like Metatron.
Yeah.
Or like like those depictions of like the new age like ascended masters.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, oh my God, it's like the worst deception of all time. And
Yeah.
that's, maybe what we're seeing a little bit politically too, is this
Mhm.
promise of this golden age, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm just like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't know. But
Yeah.
it's so hard because you think you're making the choice for the better choice, the lesser of two
Mm,
evils. But it's
mm,
like neither is
mm-mm.
great.
Yeah.
No,
Neither.
It's
no,
I
the hero that is promised for those that cry out,
yeah,
given to you by the ones that are ruining everything in the first place. Uh,
Right? Just like the
no,
book of Judges, when
yeah.
Israel cries out for a king, and then
Saul.
they're given these judges, right? And it's
Yep.
like,
Well,
well,
no,
the
Hmm.
no, yeah, no.
judges weren't
It's
great either.
they cried out for a king, and then Saul was what God gave him, and Saul ended up not being great, and neither did any of the kings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're entering into, I believe, like where the Lord is leading us is there will be no more kings to lead us. It's going to be you, me, Theresa, with our gifts of discernment. It's going
Yes.
to be the siblings of God banding together, saying like, I see this. Do you see this? I hear this. Do you hear this? Like it's going to be all of us finally working together, like the multifaceted, like the body working together
Yeah. And
without one head. Like Jesus will be the head, and there
yeah.
will not be human leader anymore.
And that
Yeah.
gift of discernment, that's what it is. Like
Yeah,
that's what we've got. And not every believer has this. Mind you, the gifts of the Spirit are gifts, and we have access to all of them, but not everybody always has all of them, right?
right.
And Joe just did a podcast about the gift of discernment.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that could be what we're tapping into as being the ones that are crying out like, no,
Yeah.
AI is super deceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not to
Mhm.
say that people that have the gift of discernment that miss it are like just whatever, but on the flip side, like I do wonder if it's going to require some people that don't have the gift to trust those that do. And I know
Yeah.
that's hard in a society that is
Sure.
super individualistic and is like, no, I'm going to do it my way or the highway, or I'm only going to, I'm only going to trust like a couple people in my corner. Ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
the church was meant to be a body
Yeah, that's why
that,
Paul said the best gift is love. That's the ultimate. And so until we become a people who love each other well and band together in unity, the undiscerning aren't going to trust the discerning, and the discerning are going to be proud and lord it over the undiscerning. Like we're just going to keep being
Uh,
divided. So
yeah,
it
yeah, right?
really, honestly, like I have a lot of hope because I think this is where we're heading is going to be a united family using all the different gifts. I think that's where
I pray and I
the
hope so.
all the hard things that are coming are going to drive us towards each other.
Yeah.
That is what I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah.
I
Well,
do think it's going to become more apparent so that we almost like even the people that don't have the gift will start to see it.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, just like maybe a final kind of thought from me is I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the prophecy of the illumination of conscience.
Mm-mm. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so this is kind of like a far out like Catholic prophecy. I don't even think a lot of Catholics have heard of it, to be honest. I kind of got wind of it like pre 2020 times. But it makes a lot of sense, kind of moving forward. And like we are just touching on that idea of like believers, but not necessarily like with deep gifts of discernment, having to trust those who do. Um, and then according to the prophecy, God will have a great mercy on us where he shows us all simultaneously all around the world the state of our conscience or the state of our soul if we were to die in that moment where we would go in the afterlife.
Hmm.
So he giving us a glimpse of like how he views our soul and then giving us a final opportunity for change.
Well,
So
He's merciful to do that. Like he's
for
merciful
sure.
enough to do that kind of thing. So
Yeah, so that's so there's a priest who sort of well there's a lot of people who have kind of tapped into this prophecy and experienced a mini one themselves and then they sort of have this insight into like it is going to happen in the future. It's in like a Marian prophecy as well at Garabandal in Spain in the 1960s. And there's a French Canadian priest, Father Michel Rodrigue, who also spoke on it. And he was saying when this does occur, if it does. I mean, if it's prophetic, so like who knows? But if and when it does occur, we will have to actually throw out our phones and TVs because we will not be able to trust what we see, right? And we'll
Is
have
this
to be
tied to the 3 days of darkness?
Yes.
I
Yes,
know. Okay, I'm
yeah.
really tracking with that.
Okay.
Because I've had a lot of dreams about it.
Yeah.
And so have my kids. Yeah. So
yeah, it all ties in, and yeah, we'll have to be led by the Spirit to places of physical refuge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know, it's interesting.
Yes. Oh, Theresa, we have to talk.
Okay, amazing. I'm so glad we connected.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad I could connect you guys.
Thanks, Thomas.
Well, unless you guys have any other thoughts, I guess
we got to stop somewhere. Of course, we have more thoughts, but we'll stop.
We'll wrap it up for today. So we'll go ahead and start. Joe, how can people reach you and find your podcast?
Sure. Yeah, definitely head towards Breadcrumbs. There's a few breadcrumb podcasts out there. So you have to put Breadcrumbs, Joe, and then it'll pop up. It's a little picture of my daughter's hands holding breadcrumbs. Anyway, and it's a prophetic podcast, different things the Lord's told me, and recently a series on the gifts. Nice. And then the Instagram page to go with that is Mildly Prophetic. So that's me.
Theresa.
So thank you so much for, having us on, Thomas, and I'm so glad to meet Joe as well. My show's called the Spiritual Gansters Podcast, and people can connect with me on X or Instagram at TS Gansters Pod.
Beautiful. Well, hopefully we haven't lost too many people, but thanks for listening, guys. There's a lot when it comes to some of these bigger conceptual topics that require a little bit of digging. We tried to keep it, relatable for people, or at least understandable, comprehensible, I guess. And if you got any questions, reach out to any of the three of us. And we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.
Bye, guys.